Hi there, welcome to another episode of Hard Talk HR. I'm your host, Mihai Nagy. HR is at a crossroad. We've learned now 1.5 years into the pandemic that organizations and business leaders demand insights-driven diagnosis quickly and actions derived from this diagnosis even quicker. How can HR analytics, how can people analytics live up to this expectation to deliver the right insight at the right time to the right organizations to make the right decision? How can we rethink our HR operating models so we are able to prioritize human capital investment and manage change in this crazy digital hybrid world of work? These are some of the questions I'm examining today with my guest, Alec Levenson. Alec is an economist, a senior research scientist at the Center for Effective Organizations at University of Southern California. So I hope you will enjoy today's episode. And if you do, don't forget to hit the subscribe button. At Hard Talk HR, we bring you fresh ideas and inspiring content from around the world of work. Alec Levenson, thank you so much for being here on the show with me today. And it's really, really exciting having you. We connected a couple of months ago, right? Somewhere in early middle of the pandemic when it all started. And we talked about organization development and people analytics. And you do have a very interesting view. You told me that people analytics and OD are twins separated at birth. So I was a curious mind. I went on Google Trends and I checked out how are these two terms sort of been trending on Google since 2004. And what was interesting, organization development was somewhere in the peak around 2004, 2005. Since then, it's kind of a slow decline in terms of interest. HR and people analytics, obviously, at the term started trending really 15 years ago, and ever since it's been growing steadily. Now, of course, OD is still more popular than the HR and people analytics. But you say that these two functions are actually twins, and we should be talking about them. We should be merging them somehow. So can you please elaborate on it? Are we setting up HR and people analytics function all wrong in organizations?
So let me go to your premise here. Okay, so first of all, I love the fact, Michali, that you wanted to do a Google search, say an activity-based search. That's definitely a database way of looking at these things. So thank you for having a good kind of, analyst hat on by looking for the data. I think that there's a difference between activity and kind of an interest versus what should be happening. And that actually goes to the heart of the problem. This idea about analytics and OD being twin separated at birth came out of a series of conversations and work that we've done at the center. It was probably, at least 10 years ago when I was running one of my targeted analytics programs, a workshop, when I was coming to the end, and John Boudreau and I had run a bunch of HR metrics and analytics workshops over many years. I then created my own. Teresa Wellborn, our colleague, also has done a lot on data storytelling. So we had this long history at the center of going back to kind of what is the core of what we mean by metrics and analytics, and how do we think about making them more strategic? So as part of that kind of longer arc of conversation, I had put at the end of one of my programs a provocative section. And that provocative section was, well, how do we think about the kind of the disciplines of OD and the disciplines of analytics? Because I was really thinking about them as being kind of a left brain, right brain way of looking at, kind of what an ideal set of HR competencies would be. Okay? And really a forward set of HR competencies, not a backward looking one. I think part of the problem with HR competency modeling, and there's a lot of efforts like this that are out there, where if you go to people today who are working in the function, you ask them about what they need to succeed, it's not necessarily going to give you the answers that you should be looking at. It's kind of like going to a child who's in like elementary school and saying, well, asking them what they should be studying in high school or college when they haven't really learned yet what they don't know, right? So I think it's a little bit of a challenge when we kind of look to people who are sitting in HR today and ask them about what they need.
We are provoking a few people, so there's some sort of a myopia being in a function. Are you suggesting that? And here's a question in this case, of course, you will elaborate on it probably. Where shall we go for this information?
Well, so I think that this is, I mean, I'm more just kind of, it's a mild critique of
Right.
some of the techniques that even other researchers have done when they say, oh, let's look at kind of what HR competency models should be. And if you're collecting lots of data from people who are sitting in the roles right now, then that's a backward looking way of thinking about it as opposed to forward looking. So forward looking would be saying, where is it that we have gaps in the HR function that we need to be filling? And the classic way is to think about this in terms of the structure of the HR function, right? So when as organizations have been creating these dedicated analytics groups, part of the reason for that is because you look across the whole function of HR and you say, well, there's an analytic and data capability that we feel that was missing before, and so we're going to build it. Okay, so that's a perfectly fine way to approach things. From an organization design, operating model standpoint, that's a fine way to do things. But there's a deeper question around how do you get actual integration of the work and have it happen effectively? I mean, we know that one of the biggest problems in HR is that HR actually mirrors the problems in the business and that it's very siloed. So I mean, and we created the role of the HR business partner a while ago as a way to try to break down those silos. So we create that, kind of that person who's supposed to go and be working directly with different parts of the business. And that helps somewhat to break down the silos. But at the same time, when we build centers of expertise, like in analytics, it kind of runs counter to it by also creating the potential for another silo. I say the potential. Now, when done well, an analytics group should actually integrate very closely with the work of the HR business partners and the work of OD. And I know we want to dive a little bit deeper into kind of OD and analytics, in a minute, but let me just kind of finish talking about kind of the structure of the HR function. So a classic way to be able to approach these questions of work design is, and this comes right out of the work of organization design that Jay Galbraith and McKinsey and others, started talking about decades ago, which is that you think about kind of where is it you need to have your primary competencies, your primary kind of decision making, and those are the different parts of the organization that you set up. So to say that we need to have experts in learning and development, in compensation and benefits, in analytics, in organization development, yes, you cannot have everybody be a Jack or Jill of all trades, and a master of none. Right? That's the classic. So you do need people who can actually specialize in different things. But the reality is that when it comes to HR, there's not a lot of specialization that's needed. I mean, in fact, the best HR kind of leaders that I know are ones who never thought of themselves or saw themselves as coming up in kind of one narrow silo within HR. In fact, it's almost kind of laughable to talk about it that way, because we know you need to be able to understand the principles of all those different parts of HR. It doesn't mean you have to have served in each of the roles, but you really need to understand them. And that's a classic way of thinking about kind of general manager HR competencies, the way we might think of general manager competencies in the business. And that's kind of the answer to the second point, which is that one is about how you define the roles, and the roles may actually be in different silos. But in terms of people's ability, you need people in HR to be able to at least deeply understand and work with all the different functional competencies, even if they're not, a deep technical expert in all of them. And that brings us to kind of where analytics and OD come together. And this was the provocative question that I had, 10, 12 years ago or so, which was, should we be thinking about kind of the ideal HR competency model as having both analytics and OD as part of it? So that's where the conversation started. Now, fast forward a few years, and one of my great collaborators and friends, Alexis Fink, who I think you know, we were having one of our many conversations, and she was showing me a model that she has for how she does analytics. And in fact, there's in that blog, if you look at that blog that I wrote, which is our analytics and OD twins separated at birth, I actually talk about this conversation, lay out different models, and one of them is Alexis's model about analytics and about how you do analytics. This is not an analytics competency model, but it's more kind of a role or task model of how you do analytics. And it's a very comprehensive end-to-end model that first of all, not everybody who are sitting in analytics roles in HR organizations do. So they don't necessarily do it as comprehensively as someone like Alexis does. But then we were having a separate conversation around, well, what does an OD competency model look like, or what does an OD process model look like? And her kind of off the cuff comment was that, well, she kind of views analytics and OD as being the same. Now I immediately said, well, of course, Alexis, you might look at it that way, but but most people would never think of it that way. And that conversation literally is what led to that blog, which then also led to an entire chapter that Alexis and I, and then with another colleague, Maura Stevenson, who's the CHRO at MedVet, but who's worked in many different organizations over the years, came up with in terms of this notion of taking that idea about analytics and OD being twin separated at birth, but really expanding it out and going deeply into it. And where that led us is, I think, a very deep consideration of the fact that in principle, you can actually make the same kind of a critique about organization development. So if we think about kind of the core steps of organization development, people think about it as being a lot around just focusing on change and interpersonal dynamics, but there are some real hard-nosed kind of diagnostic sides of it. And in an ideal world, if you take a true action research approach, which is what you should do in OD, action research means you're actually going in there and investigating and ideally measuring. This brings me to another conversation that Chris Worley, one of my other colleagues here at the center, and I had a number of years ago, where if you look at the classic book on organization development that he and Tom Cummings have written many editions of over the years, this is what people use for training many people formally in organization development. Like chapter 2 talks all about action research and about doing, kind of measurement, doing like real-time measurement and analyzing things. But yet, if you look at most kind of case studies that are written about change and you see how it happens, yeah, measurement might be part of it sometimes, like maybe doing a little bit of pulse surveying or things like that, but it isn't like it's a real core part of that OD toolkit, when in fact, in first principles, you would have it be that way. Now, the response that Chris and others will tell you from the front lines is, we're too busy. It's too complicated. It's so hard just to be able to stay on top of all the change that's taking place, while you're doing a transformation, that's why the kind of the deep diagnostic side of things and measurement might fall by the wayside, but it doesn't mean that it shouldn't be there in terms of first principles.
So in the previous answer, you kind of preempted a little bit, or it was a nice leading to my next question, and that is about speed has a totally new meaning since the COVID eruption. Organization leaders, business leaders expect data, expect insights way more quickly, and more importantly, expect actions way more quickly than probably ever before. So there are probably many organizations get successfully and successfully manage and get it right when it comes to merging or working the OD team, working with the people analytics team, but it certainly comes together with a set of challenges. What are some of these challenges? And when it comes together, working well together, what are some of the critical sort of success factors that require to make it really work well together?
Yeah, absolutely. And this actually goes to the heart of what Alexis and Maura and I kind of talk about in the work that we do. And by the way, there's both an article, which I don't expect many people will read because it's actually written more for kind of academics. So that one, it's actually coming out in a volume in Research and Organizational Change and Development. But we've taken the principles of that and actually put them into a workshop, which we call People Analytics and Change, where we actually go pretty deep into this. So we've been actually, thinking about that exact question of how do you bring together the different kind of the analytics competency set and the OD competency set to be able to be more effective in doing things and doing them in real time. Because in fact, you're right, the pace of business has not slowed down. I mean, I hate being a social scientist, being somebody who's supposed to be, there's obviously a lot of hyperbole, and everyone always says how, life is so much more different and so much harder now than it was, even 6 months ago. A little bit of that is, a bit of hyperbole. But it is true that, certainly today, the past decade or so compared to 30 years ago, the pace of business is much faster, and business, that kind of the half-life of many business models is shorter today than it was before. And so there are these constant, and high pressures around, being able to make real-time decisions with imperfect data. And that's what it ultimately comes down to. So the tension here is that people coming from a kind of more traditional analytics and measurement skill set and framework it's about rigor, it's about data, it's about making sure that you can kind of understand things, at least maybe not beyond a reasonable doubt, but to a certain amount of certainty. Whereas on the OD and change side, it's about embracing ambiguity and embracing uncertainty, because you've got to go in and make some quick diagnostics and decisions. Well, that really is, again, two halves of the same coin, right? Because the business leaders will always say, give me an answer yesterday. And in fact, and this is work, when John Boudreau and I and other colleagues talk about doing these really deep, analytics projects, they oftentimes go for a lot longer period than most business leaders have appetite for. So even years ago, I was already talking about the fact of how you can structure analytics projects so that when a stakeholder, a key person comes to you and says, I need an answer immediately, you can think about what can you do very quickly to be able to give kind of a quick and dirty response, but then make sure you're still leaving the door open so you can go ahead and give deeper insights later. Now, most of the time, there's some immediate decisions that have to get made. But the reality is that the most important things that we're asked to look at, whether you're sitting in an analytics role, an HRBP role, or a formal OD role, most of the challenges are things where you can't get the answer right away. Even if you're given a few weeks, you can do a pretty good job of diagnosing what's going on in a few weeks, but you're not going to be able to get to the really, really deep root causes of what's going on. So that's one part of it. And so what I call these the perennial problems. So these are the things where typically, whether it's around how you're structuring, structured in your manufacturing operations and call centers, R&D, go-to-market, sales teams, whatever it is, that you're trying to address things that oftentimes people have taken different cracks at doing, and they haven't been entirely successful, which is why the people who are sitting in those HRBP roles or in those COE roles are asked to now come in and do perhaps a deeper dive, take another look at things. Well, you can be pretty darn sure that if you only look at it for a short amount of time, you're not going to come up with the best answer possible. And yet the business is still moving forward and you need to make adjustments, wanted to make some changes. So what I like to use those opportunities to say, okay, this is a great chance. It's kind of like, the camel getting to get the, its head under the tent. Well, you need to be able to justify having the camel's nose under the tent, but then how do you bring the rest of the camel in? Well, it's in terms of what are the kinds of insights you can get from like a quick analysis, a quick diagnosis. Look at the existing data you have on hand, maybe the existing, and that could be survey data, it could be, information sitting in competency models or wherever it is, kind of past focus groups that have happened, and also a key part of this is that you also need to go into your own set of sense making and information gathering, which always means doing interviews, always. Here's where, in terms of if you say like, well, how are we setting up analytics groups, to be successful, or maybe, could they be more successful today? I say there's not enough of an expectation that you're going to have the people in those analytics groups going out and engaging with key stakeholders throughout the organization. In the more advanced resourced groups, they definitely have people who come from more like a consulting or OD background, where that's what they're used to doing, but you tend to get kind of separation of responsibilities amongst the people in the analytics group, where it's the people who have that more kind of business consulting hat on, they'll be the ones that will go and do interviews. And it's the more kind of traditional analytics types that won't. But the problem is that keeps those like kind of more pure measurement and statistics people in too much of a box and a silo, where they're not really understanding the power of what it means to be doing that more kind of qualitative work. And without that, they're always going to suffer in terms of their ability to be able to actually really engage in real time and actually anticipating what the HRBPs, what the OD people might need as they're going out there and working with stakeholders. So one part of it is, so it's kind of, there's different parts. So one is a work process response, which is that you need to think about what you can do quickly to be able to get some initial insights, but use that to leave the door open so you can go and continue to do some additional investigating. I view this as being a little bit like a Trojan horse, right? So you figure out the thing that you can give to make the villagers happy, make them answer their questions. And it's not like you're going to then all of a sudden come and, do an attack later on, like, like the true Trojan horse story, but it's more like you're going to, show something later. Again, going back to my friend Alexis Fink, her terminology, which I love, is called a gift with purchase. Right. So it's like you walk into a store, you're going expecting one thing, you buy that thing, but then the salesperson says, oh, you know what? Because you bought this thing, I'm going to give you something else. Well, the gift with purchase happens later on. It happens a few weeks later, or even a few months later, where you come up with some additional insights from doing more rigorous analysis. Like the initial interviews, and analysis you might have done of your existing data, you then use that foot in the door to say, let's go do a little bit of a deeper investigation, right? And then maybe you can do a bespoke survey, or you've got your, kind of your regular pulse survey or, annual employee survey coming, and you add some specific questions in there, so you can then do a more rigorous assessment. Once you're done doing that more rigorous assessment, you don't necessarily go back to those same original stakeholders and say, oh, wait a minute, no. What I told you originally was wrong. You need to do it differently, because that makes you look bad, right?
Yeah,
but recognizing these are perennial problems, whatever solutions they tried to do in that kind of few weeks to maybe a month or two time span when they wanted to give them, your initial recommendations, there's going to be some adjustments that are needed, right? They're not going to be getting the exact motivation, the exact performance, the exact engagement, whatever it is out. And so when you come back later with a deeper diagnostic, you can restart the conversation by saying, so, how are things going? And then you can even pull out, kind of updated data on how are things going in terms of your engagement metrics, your performance metrics, whatever they are. And then the dialogue at that point could be, hey, I see that we're still, falling short of where we want to be in terms of like, XYZ criteria. Here's some additional insights that we got from digging a little bit deeper. Now, why don't we think about how we might integrate that? And by the way, this describes how some of the best work that I myself have done in the work that I've done with companies, where again, it's that the initial engagement is we need to find some kind of like, red meat to throw to the lions, to give them that initial, insights to make it, to justify their willingness to want to keep working with us. But then we say, but part of the deal is we're not going to come in and just do, particularly for myself and my colleagues that take this more kind of deep action research approach. We don't say, oh yeah, you can just come in and do this really quickly in a short amount of time. We'll say, yes, we can meet your immediate needs, but part of the deal here is you need to allow us to be able to engage it deeper. And even if you don't use those insights right away when we give them back to you, you'll have them sitting there and ready so that when it comes time again for the next round of decision making or rethinking things, you'll be in a really great position to be able to make even better decisions the next round.
So people analytics leaders now, a couple of years ago, it was about learn the skills of storytelling. So it's not just about data, it's about being able to translate and sell the story. And now we learn that it's not just about that, but you need to be able to become somewhat a salesperson, convince stakeholders, give them enough information to start the conversation, but eventually learn skills about interviewing and learn how you go back with your fresh set of data when you have more insight, more evidence to build that relationship, build that continuum. Thank you so much. Great insights. And the pandemic has given us a lot of opportunities as well. Of course, it's tragic as in many personal fronts, and I hope not many of our viewers are affected by the current situation at personal level, especially now what's happening in India is truly tragic. From the organization point of view, it's also given us, on the other hand, an opportunity to rethink how we work in HR. And somewhat, I feel that HR is at the crossroads. And here's our opportunity to rethink our operating models, how we prioritize human capital investment, how we adjust, how we manage change in today's crazy digital hybrid way of work. So what is your view on that? How shall we looking into new HR operating models?
Yeah, so it's a great question, and I don't know that I have the perfect answer. I think that
probably nobody does.
Indeed. This is, John Boudreau and I were actually discussing this, not too long ago, and one of the observations is he's had, as we've gone through the pandemic, and his recent writing has shown this, is that we just went through a period of HR feeling very empowered, because when the shutdowns happened, well, both the shutdowns in terms of in-person work, but then also all the mitigation that had to happen in terms of where people couldn't work remotely, where you had to still work in person. We had to, it's all the things about, about social distancing and, and PPE and all that. I mean, that was very empowering, because there was no way the business could succeed without having HR right there at the table. So it was a great position to be in, but it was also extremely tactical. And even to today, a year later, it remains extremely tactical. And part of the problem has been, and we've seen this, I mean, I know you've seen this in the companies you talk to and the people listening here, they've lived through this, that we kind of went through different waves, where, like, the initial period was just, the business is going to fail if we don't solve the immediate kind of, space issues, both, people working remotely and where you couldn't work remotely, how you just make sure they're not literally getting sick and dying, right? So that was like, you had all hands on deck, had to make that happen, or else the whole business could fail, right? So that focuses people's attention. Now, it's been a little bit disappointing, because you get the inevitable people who say, oh, wow, we've done such a great job about prioritizing and really focusing and coming together in real time. How do we make sure we don't, we can kind of bottle that and not lose it as we go back to working the way we were before? And I find that to be a fairly naive observation, because it's obvious why it worked. It's because there was a single objective. The single objective was we had to figure out how to adapt to COVID immediately, or the business would fail. The problem, and we've seen this again in the companies that we work with, and globally, that as we went past, kind of 3 or 4 months, and then could at least figure out kind of what the immediate near term was going to look like while COVID was still happening, come September, October, there are a lot of these kind of longer term strategic things, both within HR and the business, that you couldn't avoid, you couldn't still put on the back burner. And so those started to come back in again, even while people were still dealing with all the immediate challenges of COVID. And so it's been, I mean, when we talk about kind of the operating model, I mean, part of the problem is that the operating model that's been there for the business and HR has basically been saying that we have to be operating about 150% capacity, and you don't get to choose. And so people they've gotten tired. They've gotten pushed to the brink in many cases, and that still hasn't gone away more than a year later, because we still haven't solved this, blended work, partial return to work, partial remote. We're going to be dealing with this for a long time moving forward. So on the one hand, I think it's really important to kind of recognize where people are, and to say that we have had to have a different kind of operating model, because we've had this really immediate need that continues on about how to deal with the pandemic. And then layering on top of that, how do we then continue to work on our longer term, objectives? In terms of lessons that I want to have coming out of this, a key thing for me, because what's going to happen is eventually we will be at the point, it may take another year and a half, where we're, kind of back to whatever that new normal is. What I don't want to happen is to lose that, let's call it the ambidexterity that we've developed here. As the ambidexterity has been, we've had to be able to adapt to a highly uncertain environment in real time, while still working on these longer term, initiatives that never really went away. We always have the tension about how do you exploit your current kind of business model, your current cash flow, to then, create the opportunities, the exploration for the new. This is that classic case of, it's ambidexterity, you can call it agility, whatever it is. We've always had that. But part of the tension has been that we organize for efficiency, because, unless you're working for an extremely high margin business like, Goldman Sachs or Google, where they're basically, minting money with high margins, everybody else, kind of more normal organizations, is dealing with much lower margins and not a lot of room for error in terms of, and so you make things very prescriptive in terms of, you put boundaries on people, you make it really clear how you need to execute against the products and services you're delivering, because that's how you make money. But at the same time, we can't be too restrictive, because otherwise then, we're not freeing people up for the creativity, so they can think about how you do continuous improvement, how do you do innovation. So this is that classic, kind of, you have to both exploit and explore at the same time. Well, we have just gone through and are continuing to go through a period where we had to deal with a lot of uncertainty, not about future business models, not about future products and services, but uncertainty about how do we make the darn thing work right now. And so what that's done is it's forced people to come together on a regular basis around the existing operations and to be much more flexible and adaptable, and particularly coming together in real time as needed in whatever configuration, HR, finance, the business, operations, research, I mean, kind of all, kind of the different parts, kind of reconfiguring as needed to be able to make real-time quick decisions when there's this uncertainty we have to keep on resolving. And so that to me is the part that I don't want to lose sight of, because I think that that's given us, we're learning how to be more agile in terms of coming together quickly. And as we eventually move away from the pandemic and people are able to relax a bit more, I don't want to lose that sense, kind of the feeling that comes, that sense of urgency of, there may be some things that we have to address. There always are things we have to address, which are not about immediate decisions to be made right now. But if we don't make the right decisions now about longer term objectives, then you kick the can down the road too far, and end up in a situation where you end up having to make too quick decisions about these really important longer term business objectives without having the right people at the table, the right real-time thinking. That's what I don't want to lose sight of.
Absolutely. I mean, ability of managing, you mentioned, it's a great example is managing this organization ambidexterity. I think that's absolutely critical, because some sort of disruption, some sort of crisis will come probably sooner than we expect, even after the pandemic is over. Whether it's a financial crisis, whether it's another pandemic, we don't know. But so long we are somehow prepared and not forgetting what we've learned in the past 1.5 years, probably make us more resilient, more robust as organizations. Last but not least, Alec, you will be speaking at the HR Congress Academy in 2 weeks from now at the time of this recording. What are some of the key ideas you plan to bring to the event? What are some of the key objectives and key sort of a strategic thoughts and actionable ideas you will be sharing so our attendees can take away?
Yeah, so I'm going to go quite a bit deeper into these exact kind of models about how you do analytics the right way and how you do OD the right way, which again can deviate from practice. So we kind of challenge people on both sides, both on the OD side of the house and the analytics side of the house. But something which hasn't really been clear in what we've written so far, but this is actually recent conversations we've been having amongst the companies that we work with and other colleagues like Dave Milner and Max Blumberg, two of our other colleagues that we work with. We've been having this broader conversation around kind of what is the role of the HR business partner and the HR BP versus OD, or versus analytics. And so it's kind of like there's a triangle where you've got like the HR business partner, you've got OD, and you've got analytics, and there's a lot of really important questions there around how do we actually effectively, decide who's supposed to do what work? How does it, happen in terms of handoffs across those three different groups? People who are HR business partners are not required to get a certification in OD or in analytics, but in some ways, to be the best HR business partners, you kind of need to be able to really engage well in either or both of those, or at least know how to integrate much more closely. So I see that's going to be where, both in my, work in the HR Congress, but also the work that we're doing in in the workshops that we're doing, and other writings that we're doing here at the center, that's a core part of it. And so I'm really looking forward to the conversations at the Congress that will be and wanting to hear from the people attending around, both sharing what we're seeing and what we're thinking about and the kinds of thoughts we're developing, but also engaging in a real dialogue around how is it that they're addressing these issues? Because to me, that's actually, it's important and really and we learn a lot when we're able to not just say, oh, here's what we're thinking, but then hear and engage in a real dialogue around what are you seeing and how are you thinking about adopting it, because that's the real action research approach. I mean, like, people coming to a conference like this might not think about it as action research, but it is for us, because we get to then kind of test out the ideas we've heard before, share the insights, but then also learn and to do it collaboratively, which is what I really enjoy.
Alec Levenson, thank you so much. And ladies and gentlemen, if you'd like to dive deeper to some of these ideas and some of the thinking, definitely won't be disappointed. So join us at the HR Congress Academy on 18th, 19th of May, 2 weeks from now at the time of this recording. And I hope you enjoyed today's episode. And if you did, don't forget to hit the subscribe button. Alec, thank you so much for being here with us. And I look forward to meeting you virtually online again very soon.
Thank you very much. Looking forward to it.